When he announced this year's budget, Governor Brown noted that the state had a $59 billion infrastructure backlog, much of it having to do with the state's transportation system. And while traffic speeds may be slowing down, what's not slowing down is the number of vehicles, numbered at over 35 million a year, that travel on California's highways, some of which are more than 60 years old. The problem is compounded by the fact that the main source of money to add new capacity and fix state highways, the tax Californians pay at the pump, is bringing in less money as cars and trucks become more fuel efficient. What needs to be done to fix California's highways? We'll ask Steve Takagawa, Caltrans Deputy Director of Maintenance and Operations, Anthony Simbal, the Deputy Legislative Analyst at the Nonpartisan Legislative Analyst Office, and Dan Walters, the Sacramento Bee's political columnist covering state politics. Stuck in traffic, fixing the state's highways' political gridlock.
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from Paramount Agricultural Companies, growing healthy food for you and your family.
From the California Channel at the State Capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
What is the condition of California highways and bridges, and what is it going to cost to repair and maintain them? Our guest is Steve Takagawa, the Deputy Director of Maintenance at Caltrans. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, how does Caltrans go about checking current roads and bridges, their condition? I assume it's more than a simple eyeball test.
Yeah, I think fortunately in the last 2 years we've automated our pavement condition survey. Historically, we used to look at it with experts at their eyes and give them their best value of what needs to be done. But 2 years ago, we changed to an automated pavement condition survey. What that means is we're actually go out in a van that has lasers hooked up and can actually look at the pavement itself, underneath the pavement. Every single crack that's in there, every bump is monitored and put into a database. We do that at driving speed, so we could do it at 65, 70 miles an hour.
The speeds that real people drive?
Real people drive. We're not holding anyone up, but we're doing all that. It's a lot safer for our people that used to be out on the side of the road. But the beauty of it is we're able to do it faster, more accurate, and the more accurate lets us pick the right projects in the right locations so we get California bigger bang for the buck. So we're able to say we knew it used to be bad pavement, and so how do we prioritize it basically with the eyes, but now we're able to actually use real data, prioritize it, and we're able to reduce the distress of the pavement or the deterioration. We're able to hit that at the right time in the right place. And so it's a better system.
Much more objective, much less subjective.
Absolutely.
It seems like you're covering a lot more ground, and you're doing it with more quality, a better analysis.
Yeah, it's one of the
good system. It sounds like
one of the best in the nation. Absolutely. And so that investment has helped us to pick the right projects and project which projects need to be prioritized and funded first.
So we got our people who are watching going to be thinking, we're going to watch out for those Caltrans vans out there. They're checking out the highways. So what is the condition of California highways?
Well, the roads itself, I think it's probably in the last 2 years the best it's been in probably 20 years. In about 2011, we had 75% of our pavement was in good health. That's what we call it, good health. Currently, this year, it's about 84% of our pavement is in good health. And part of the reason is because we've started concentrating more on fix it first and during preventive maintenance rather than just picking the worst pavement. And so we're able to get a bigger bang for a buck and reduce the deterioration and keep it better longer.
Well, that still means that 16% isn't in good health.
Correct, correct.
What's your target?
Our target is to try to get to 90 to 95% good health, so 5,000 lane miles that would need to be fixed, and that is a good target. Pavement is always deteriorating, but we're doing a lot of things to try to increase the life cycle of the pavement. We're now designing pavement to last 40 years instead of 20.
I'm going to ask a very simple question, but when you say lane miles, is that each lane?
Each lane.
Okay, so if you have a 2-lane highway, that counts, 1 mile counts as 2 miles.
Correct.
Okay.
And there's about 50,000 lane miles in the state that we take care of with Caltrans.
Okay. Well, I'm just wondering, what about the bridge inventory? How are the bridges in California?
So the bridges, I think, are actually, they're above our goal. Our goal is 95% good, and we're about 96% of them are in good health. So I think that's a great change of where we have been. We can't automatically go out there and automated type inventory inspection.
You're going to need visual inspection.
We
for
have
those.
to do visual inspection and within hands distance. So there are some places where we have to rappel down on ropes and look at all the bridges. We do have underwater bridge investigations. So we have to go underneath the water and at hands distance in murky water, cold water, and still able to inspect all the bridges. So we're meeting our target, but there is a lot more to do.
Okay, so I assume it's going to be less expensive to repair a highway than to rebuild one. Exactly what is the difference between repair versus rebuilding a highway? What's the cost difference?
Well, to do a preventive treatment, it's about $98,000 to $100,000 per lane mile. Now, when you go into rehab or reconstruct, it gets into a lot more money and in depth, and that's about close to $500,000 to up to $2 million a lane mile. So it's a big difference. Could be up to 20 to 1.
Yeah, I had read somewhere that for every dollar spent on maintenance, you save $6 to $14 to rebuild the same road.
Correct.
It seems those numbers about right. And Caltrans has something called a fix-it-first approach.
Correct.
Can you briefly describe what that is?
Yeah, fix it first is basically maintaining what you have. Instead of building new stuff, let's maintain what we have and keep it in good condition. It keeps it longer. It's the same thing as if you look at your car, you should change the oil before you get a new engine. And so I think that's something that we're continuously pushing and focusing, and you could see the difference from our pavement going from 75% good health to 84% good health.
So how much money do you spend on maintenance and rehabilitation versus building new highways?
So on the project side, if you look at how much money is available for new lane miles, there's probably about $685 million a year. On the keep it good, reconstruct, maintenance part of it, it's about $2 billion a year. Now, one of the things, it is a little bit of a difference, three times the amount. But if you look about 2014, in that end of that year, we built less than 100 new lanes, but we rehab or fixed over 5,000 lane miles.
Okay.
So the dollar miles is 3 times, but when you look at how much work got done, it's a lot.
So I had read 76% for maintenance, 24% for new capacity, but actually lane miles is actually even greater than that.
Yes, lane miles are actually greater.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for giving us that overview on the state's highways and bridges. Up next, the governor noted that the state has a $59 billion infrastructure backlog. What does he propose to do about it? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome. What is Governor Brown proposing to be spent on California's highways and bridges in the next fiscal year? Our guest is Anthony Simbal, the Deputy Legislative Analyst at the nonpartisan Legislative Analyst's Office. Welcome. Can you provide us some background on what the governor is proposing regarding transportation?
Yeah, the governor for the coming year is proposing almost $18 billion for various transportation programs and departments, an increase of about $2 billion. A lot of that is actually for high-speed rail. The high-speed rail project the state is undergoing due to increased expenditures.
What about for Caltrans specifically? I think I'd read it was around $10 billion.
That's correct.
And how much of an increase is that? About? I thought I read it was like 2% or something. Does that sound about right?
Not too big of an increase.
Yeah, so it's still small.
Correct.
Inflation, I think, is even running a little more than that, so it might even be less than inflation. So we've got the state's highways and bridges. They're largely funded by a gas tax. Can you explain why that's beginning to cause some problems?
We started the gas tax, I think, initially around 1923. But over time, the types of vehicles that people are using have changed. We've gotten more fuel-efficient vehicles. So the gas tax isn't so much a close relationship of like a road user charge. In other words, people could still be driving the same miles we were 20, 30 years ago, but they're using less gas. And at the same time, the needs of the highway system, construction costs have increased. So there's a greater mismatch between gas tax revenues and how much it costs to maintain the system.
So people are getting out of their gas guzzlers. They're moving toward more efficient vehicles. Heck, some are even moving toward electric vehicles.
Correct.
And electric vehicles aren't paying any tax, right?
Correct.
So they're using the roads, and I thought I read somewhere about 80,000 vehicles, electric vehicles. So they're not paying any tax. And so that revenue is declining over time, yet the population's increasing. And road mileage being driven, that's probably still pretty high.
Yeah, and the highway system is getting older.
Getting older, right? Yeah, my recollection was most of the system was built like in the 60s and 70s,
Correct.
and 80s. Yeah. So anyway, so as a result, there's been this attempt to look at what's called a user fee. I think it's formally known as a road usage charge, user fee, in place of a gas tax. And now Oregon has attempted to do this, this road usage fee. How does it work there?
So correct. Oregon is actually the only state so far to implement some sort of mileage-based fee or road user charge. They did 2 pilot programs, one in 2001 and one in 2012, to examined different challenges, privacy issues came up, sort of the type of equipment. And then this coming July, they're actually going to implement it for the first time as an actual program on a small scale, mainly for sort of light vehicles.
Yeah, so you said that was about an 11-year gap between the two studies.
Yeah.
That was a long time. Any reason why it took so long, or?
I think it started at that time, but it took multiple years to get things going, to work out a lot of different kinks on. One big thing is the kind of equipment you use,
Right.
and what information it tracks of an individual driver, which raises a lot of privacy issues.
Right. I mean, I think it's one of the concerns of consumers is, I don't want you to know I don't want the government to know where I'm driving. But could the system also just be the miles driven, not necessarily
That's
where
what
you're driving?
Oregon realized, and that's what they're going to implement this July, is just miles driven. So the government wouldn't be recording where you drove, it's just how many miles you've driven.
And my recollection of the little that I've read on that is that Oregon's also giving consumers, voters, citizens, options on how they want to put down that number, whether it's a GPS system or they're going to write it down or whatever.
Or your cell phone.
Or your cell phone. And
Correct.
Let me guess, an app. Yeah, for apps for everything. And I think what I read was they're talking about 1.5 cents per mile is the charge that they're looking at right now on the fee. Very interesting if they try to do that in California. Well, so the governor's proposed a feasibility study, right? And he wants to see, would such a user fee work in California? What do you think, what does the LAO think of the governor's proposal?
So the legislature last year authorized the bill to establish this pilot program that the governor is now proposing funding for, to test whether or not this would be a good alternative to the gas tax that we talked about earlier. The issues we raised are mostly about process. The legislature created this technical advisory committee to figure things out, like the design, who's going to run the program, and the governor's proposal already assumes certain dynamics of the program before the advisory committee.
Is the cart before the horse, maybe, the right way to look at this? So they're already
Correct.
saying, we're already doing this, the size of the sample, and how much money they're going to spend, and none of this has even been decided yet by the technical advisory committee.
Correct.
Oh, okay. So the LAO's got some issues with that. You're thinking you got the cart before the
Yeah,
horse.
but we should test this because that's what the legislature approved. It's just a matter of the process.
Okay, so it's a process issue. Let me switch gears a little bit. The governor's also proposing more money so Caltrans can have more projects that are shelf ready. You don't think that's necessarily warranted. Why is that?
Well, so Caltrans, they're requesting some resources to have the shelf of projects to the extent there's unexpected funding. So not funding that we're planning, like if the federal government, after making allocations to state, there's some extra money left over because a certain state didn't use all of its allocation.
Right.
Well, over the years, we've been able to use that money without having a shelf of projects. So we don't think it's necessary, and we don't think it's cost effective, because you can still be waiting for money, and yet you have to update the projects periodically.
Right, because if you have a product that's shelf ready, of course, it might be a year later, and
Correct.
environmental conditions have changed, maybe capacity needs have changed, and so having it shelf ready is not really shelf ready because you still got to go back and tweak it. And so your concern is maybe too many things on the shelf.
Yes.
The governor's also put some money in the budget for transportation management systems, and those are things like traffic signals, ramp meters, highway advisory radios, closed-circuit TV cameras, all that kind of stuff. Was it too much, too little, or just right, in your
Well,
opinion?
he's got two proposals. One is to propose this money to just maintain what we currently have. We think that's a good thing because these things help deal with traffic flow. Then his other proposal is to do pilot programs and test how effective these things are. We're just requesting they have more details and information the legislature does before they approve it.
Okay, wait and see approach. Well, I want to thank Anthony Simbald with the Legislative Analyst Office for giving us a summary of the governor's proposal on state highways and bridges. Up next, show me the money. How much does it cost to pay for highways and bridges in California and to maintain them? Transportation politics next. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're now joined by one of the Capitol's best-known observers of state politics, Dan Walters of the Sacramento Bee. Welcome back to the Maddy Report.
Thank you.
So there are several sources for state funding. A big one is obviously the federal government, but Congress hasn't passed a multi-year transportation bill in over a decade, and the gas tax of the federal gas tax of 18 cents hasn't changed since 1993. So what's going to happen here? Are we going to see gridlock just continue, or is something actually going to happen with a transportation bill out of Congress?
Well, I can't predict Congress. Even people in Congress can't predict Congress. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Look, highways are a big pork barrel thing. It's a big thing because it affects every motorist. If you raise their taxes, there's all sorts of ramifications, and that's both at the federal level and the state level. We haven't changed our gas tax really in 20 years either, and of course, inflation continues to erode revenues, but it's a double whammy. Not only does inflation erode revenues, but in fact we are using less gasoline all the time due to more efficient vehicles, and also vehicles that don't use any gas, like electric cars and so forth. So it's a squeeze, and the highway system is getting older, and there are always more motorists on the road, and the roads get beat up more, and so there's this multi-level squeeze going on. Some of it's reflected at federal level, some of it's reflected at the state level, but the fact is that California's highway system, at least, is a system in crisis. It has, you remember, we didn't have freeways really until after World War II. The first one was built just slightly before World War II, the Pasadena Freeway from downtown LA to Pasadena. But basically the system was built between 1945 and about 1975. It's a 30-year period. And that's been 40 years ago, okay? So we're talking about some of these freeways are like 70 years old, including the Pasadena Freeway, which is well over 70 years old and is literally falling apart. I mean, chunks are falling out of it. So you have a system that was built in a short period of time, and therefore it's aging in a short period of time. There's not a big stretch out. And you have this ever larger problem. California has the second worst pavement conditions of any state in the United States, second only to New Jersey, according to the Federal Highway Administration, as well as the worst traffic congestion. So we have a problem that's bigger almost than any place else.
Yeah, the capacity issue seems to be a big one. But as you were saying, you know, the gas tax, the state gas tax, because it's been constant, is actually falling for the reasons you mentioned. And the numbers I saw was $2.9 billion in 2003. 10 years later, 2.9, I'm sorry. 10 years later, it's $2.3 billion. It's actually gone back. So it doesn't seem like the gas tax might be the best way to generate dollars for maintaining California's highways and bridges. So, you know, is that something we should be thinking we should move away from?
Well, yes. In fact, the legislature passed a bill requiring the state to look at alternative methods of raising transportation revenues, and there's been a task force convened and so forth. Everybody's looking at some form of a mileage fee that would also pick up the electric cars, the hybrids, and that sort of thing. They're experimenting with it up in Oregon already. And they're looking at it in California. But there are caveats on it. A lot of people are concerned about privacy. How do you record that mileage? How do you report that mileage? Is Big Brother going to be watching you where you're driving, or you have a little black box in your car that tells you everywhere you go that the cops can get a hold of if they want to? All that sort of stuff. So it's not a simple equation. It can be overcome. Those situations and those concerns can be overcome, but it's a complicated issue. But say unless there's some sort of a mileage fee, then your only real alternatives are either tolls or gas tax.
Well, let me go back. Let me go back to that in a second. But I want to ask you about two other things that are possibilities. One is the vehicle registration fee.
Yes.
What about raising that and using that specifically for maintenance?
It could be raised. But remember, there are two parts to your vehicle registration fee, basically. There's the part that's the registration fee, which is fairly small. The rest of it is a tax. It's a property tax on the value of your car. And so you would be essentially raising a property tax. It's another form of tax. In fact, so it makes it a tax deductible on your income tax return. It's a tax. So it has the same problem of all other kinds. You have to be willing to raise a tax of some kind. And that in itself, regardless of the form of the tax, is a difficult political issue in the Capitol.
Yeah, I just saw a PPIC, Public Policy Institute of California, poll that said only 23% would favor a vehicle registration fee for California highways, and not a lot of support there. So let me go back and talk about this user fee. Speaker of the Assembly, Tony Atkins, was talking about this $1 a week fee, essentially, user fee. In Oregon, I think they're charging 1.5 cents a mile. You know, are there ways that dealing with that privacy issue seems to be a big deal? Oregon's coming up with the idea of saying, listen, we'll give people different alternatives to report their mileage. Is that maybe a solution here?
There are all sorts of potentials. Some of them are technological, some of them personal. You have to put it in this context. Californians drive over 300 billion miles a year. 300 billion with a B miles a year.
My head is wrapped around. That's a lot of miles.
That's a lot of miles. If you add it, if you just put 1 penny on that, do the arithmetic. It's about $3 billion a year. A penny and a half would be about $4.5 billion a year. That would be a substantial amount of money to go into the highway system. But it's not, even if you raise the money, then the question comes, how are you going to spend it? Are you going to spend it on maintenance? Are you going to spend it on capacity increases? How you spend it is just as controversial as whether you have it to spend or not.
I'm not even going to mention high-speed rail. But when we come back, we'll talk about, is there a gas tax in your future? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with Dan Walters, a well-read columnist for the Sacramento Bee, writes on state politics. And recently the PPIC, Public Policy Institute of California, came out with a poll that said that Californians want good roads, but they don't really want to pay for it. More California dreaming?
Yeah, well, that's not confined to roads. Californians in general would like you to spend more money on colleges, on schools, on roads and everything. But if you put it in the context of raising your taxes, they get real hinky about it.
Unless
real
it's
fast.
cigarette tax or...
But that's on tax on somebody else.
Right.
Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the fellow behind the tree, right?
Right.
Well, but roads are different. Roads are supposed to be different. They're supposed to be a dedicated tax to a dedicated system, what's called a user fee, or user tax. And it's supposed to be isolated from the rest of government spending. It's supposed to be
typically
self-contained.
bipartisan.
And typically, well, it has been bipartisan in past years, not so much now. But that same poll said that what voters want is better roads, and they want to borrow money to pay for them from general obligation bonds, which would have to be repaid out of the state's general fund, which would be less money for schools, less money for colleges, less money for all those things they also want. There ain't no free lunch. If Californians want better roads, less crowded roads, smoother roads, they're going to have to pay for them some way, whether it's an increased gas tax, whether it's an increased registration fee, whether it's a mileage tax or fee of some kind. There isn't a free lunch in this or anything else in government. And
in life.
In life,
Yeah.
that's right.
You know, it's interesting. Isn't that the giant credit card that Governor Schwarzenegger used to talk about? People just want to put it on the credit card. And in the state, it's bonds. It's essentially putting it on the credit card instead of paying for it. You know, if we do have new taxes, though, Republicans are going to have to be engaged here. But it's unlikely they're going to support new taxes. So now what?
I think there's a possibility that Republicans would go for a dedicated road tax of some kind, particularly if you could delineate where the money would be spent. It's in the Republican parts of California, in some ways, that the problem is the worst. And because people drive longer distances out in the interior areas of California. They don't have transit, they have to drive, and so in many ways they have a bigger stake in the outcome of this than other regions. I think if it were carefully crafted, it could be done. It would take leadership. It would take leadership by the governor. He would have to get on board. He would have to do the necessary political spade work to get it done. I think it's possible, maybe not probable, but I think it's at least possible.
Interesting. Well, there's some saying that the legislature doesn't act. They're going to put something on the ballot in November. How likely is that?
I think it would be very difficult to put this on the ballot as by way of an initiative, because it would immediately engender opposition from the anti-tax people. It would be an easy thing to campaign against. You are being taxed more. People don't like being taxed
Well,
more.
the governor got Prop 30 passed for education.
Prop 30, however, did not tax the people who voted for Proposition 30. Proposition 30 basically taxed the very few people and the 1%ers at the top of the income ladder.
That sales tax.
Tiny little tiny sales tax. It was virtually all income tax on the wealthy. Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the fellow behind the tree.
Here we go again. Well, let me ask you one last question, and that is, wouldn't all this be moot if the state simply factored in ongoing maintenance costs when they're building a project and say, we need to make sure there's a revenue stream, a dedicated revenue stream to maintain these highways?
Well, there is a dedicated revenue stream to maintain these highways. It just isn't big enough. That's the problem.
A sufficiently large revenue stream.
And we need more money for maintenance. We also need more money for capital. There's literally hundreds of billions of dollars of backlog that California needs. We have the most crowded highways in America. And you say, well, what about transit? What about the high-speed rail? High-speed rail, by its own figures, would reduce automotive traffic in California by less than 1%.
Okay, I am not going to, that's a whole other show, and we'll leave it at that. Well, I want to thank Dan Walters from the Sacramento Bee, also Anthony Sybil from the LAO's office, and Steve Takagawa from Caltrans for joining us. If you'd like to stay current on state and local politics, you can sign up for our free e-newsletter, The Maddy Daily, by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.